absolutely wonderful welcome to you all. My name's Morag Gamble from the Permaculture Education Institute. I'm calling in from the unceded lands of the Jinnaburra and Gubbi Gubbi here in southeast Queensland. I live here in a permaculture food forest in the midst of a permaculture eco-village, and I'm so delighted to be able to share this session with you. But before I introduce our special guest for today, I just did want to say that this is our weekly Wild and Kind conversation. This is the second in our series that's following on from the International Festival of Wild and Kind Ideas, which I know many of you attended. Thank you so much for that. What a blast. What an absolute blast. I have to say, I'm still recovering slightly, but that's okay. And I know that there's lots of sessions within the festival too that perhaps on your wait list to have a listen to and to check out. So don't worry about taking your time because the replays are going to be there accessible for as long as you need, and you can share them around and listen to them again. But I'm delighted to have this chance to take a more sort of a slower pace to things, and we have these weekly sessions. So I just wanted to say a little bit before I bring Anne in. The Permaculture Education Institute exists really to host conversations that bring people together from all parts of the world to explore what permaculture means in all different fields. There's people who are here from the built environment professions, from farming professions, from education, from health. And what is it? What are the edges of permaculture, and how do all the different perspectives of it actually help us to see it in a different way? So Permaculture Education Institute really is about expanding the field of what permaculture is, because it's a growing field. It's not a thing that's fixed and stuck. It is growing. And every time you engage with it or people have another conversation about it, the field grows. So that's what the Permaculture Education Institute is about, is creating spaces where we can have those conversations, see new perspectives in permaculture, and then to explore how we can integrate that into our designs and how we can become better educators and communicators and leaders and catalysts for this work in the world. Because my perspective is that everywhere needs permaculture educators, and we need people out in the world doing this kind of work wherever you are, whatever the resources you have, whatever your field, whatever your passion is, that this kind of one planet way of living that's about earth care, people care, fair share is rippling out. Also, what we do here at the Permaculture Education Institute is really try to amplify this, what in the systems view of life thinking is talking about islands of coherence. There are so many micro projects and people doing fabulous work all over the world. We are filled in our news with doom stories. But when you look at the world of permaculture and agroecology and forest gardens and all this kind of thing, you see everywhere around the world these amazing things that are happening. And so every now and then they become visible. And this is what we call those islands of coherence. We want to turn them into archipelagos of coherence. We want to myceliate and connect these with, not necessarily make a big organization, but that the movement sees itself, that there's a sense of wholeness about this, and that we feel like, yes, really great things are happening all around the world, to share our stories, to be inspired by other stories, to listen to what's possible. So I talk a lot about being planetary possibilitarians. What's possible? What can we do? How can we make it happen? And really see that big picture, but look at the hyper-local. What can we do where we are? So given that, we have wonderful guests doing amazing work all around the world. Our guest today is Dr. Anne Stobart. Now, Anne and I had a chat about 3 years ago on the podcast, the Sense Making the Changing World podcast. She had recently released this lovely book, the Medicinal Forest Garden Handbook. And if you haven't seen this yet, I highly recommend it. I know Anne's going to talk a bit about what's in that. That came out through Permanent Publications. So if the Permaculture Publication organisation in the UK that also produces the Permaculture magazine, they have over 100 titles on permaculture. So if you haven't come across them yet, please have a look. And in the permaculture program with me in the Institute, there's a link in the course where you can get 25% off. So just have a look for that if you are looking for some books. So back to Anne. So Anne is based in Devon, and she is a self-confessed plantaholic. That's me too. She's a medicinal herbalist, a researcher, author. That's her third book, actually, I believe, and runs education programs about all of these things, really focusing in today on healing plants and natural plant medicines from trees, from food forests, and how we can integrate this idea of herbal medicine with permaculture gardens and forest gardens. So without anything more, I would love to welcome Anne into the stage here to join me. What Anne is going to do is she is going, oops, let me just bring myself back into the field. Here we are. Hello, Anne. How are you?
Hi. Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's so great to have you here as part of our Wild and Kind Wednesdays. I just remembered too, some of you are already doing it, but please, if you haven't already, maybe drop in the chat where you're calling in from around the world. It's really great for Anne and myself to be able to see where you are. And please also use this chat as much as you like throughout the session as a way to add comments or references or things that you're working on. But Anne has a series of slides to show us a bit more about what it is that she's working on and to give us visual images. I'm going to pass to you, Anne, to take the lead now, and I'll come back in after the slides. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and lovely to be here. Just the first thing to say is, although I am a doctor, it's a doctorate that I have completed in the history of medicine. So I'm not a medical doctor, which does affect you in different countries. Some places you're not allowed to make a diagnosis at all. And I can talk more about the regulation side if anybody's interested later. But when I first spoke with Morag about this, I think we had a general title, Herbal Medicine, and where it's localization day, week, and also thinking about permaculture. And then I realized, actually, what I want to talk about is abundance, because permaculture and herbal medicine fit beautifully together. And so I've come up with about 9 or 10 slides, which show visually. Visually is not really my best trait, visual stuff. I'm more of a talker, as you can tell from the books, and a reader behind. So this is a challenge for me, and I'm hoping it will work. But I wanted to add, and where we are, because I think there are a whole lot of interesting contradictions about herbal medicine. For example, people spend millions of pounds and bringing in imported herbs for all sorts of complaints. And so that's quite the opposite in a way of localization. And there are people who probably think that the kind of herbs they need grow right where they live, naturally. So that brings in another question of what's really wild, what's really natural in your area. So I'm going to try and pick up on some of those issues as we go through. But first of all, the first image here is Holt Wood, which is no longer our property, myself and my partner, but between 2005 and 2020, we purchased a 2.5 acre plot of, it turned out to be Sitka spruce, about 1,000 trees, well grown, perfect for timber and chip. And we had the lot felled and replanted as a medicinal woodland. The book that Morag mentioned, the Medicinal Forest Gardener Handbook, contains a lot more information about that, but also I'll mention some of our experience of creating that wonderful woodland in North Devon. So my knowledge is all about temperate plants. I'm afraid I don't know so much about plants suitable to boreal and tropical areas, although I will try. So here we go. So really, it's good to think about influences and where did I come from? And my background was in sciences, psychology at university, this kind that teaches pigeons to peck on buttons, so not very useful psychology. And as a young adult, I got into growing, and particularly vegetables, houseplant, anything I could get my fingers on, really. But it wasn't until I think it was my late 30s, that I discovered that there was actually training courses in applying herbal medicine. So I went off like a shot, and I was so eager to soak up all that knowledge that I went straight through into a clinical practitioner training, which ran as a distance learning course in the UK, later became a degree, which I then later managed at Middlesex University. That was run by the National Institute of Medical Herbalists initially, or at least accredited by them. And the National Institute of Medical Herbalists in the UK is probably the largest Western herbal medicine professional organisation. And it's a good start if you're interested in training to use herbal medicine, because they do, I think they still do, list a whole range of courses. And since degrees have become less easy to set up, shall I say, and run, unless they're related to employment here, those courses have tended to migrate to other organisations. And so there's quite a range of possibilities. But the most recent, if I can say recent, in the last 30 years, influence on me was permaculture. And when I thought about it, I realised my fascination with permaculture started with water. And so the images here reflect different kind of liquids, the allotment store of water, the liquid extracts from herbs. My partner, she's a great photographer and designer, and she produced the image in the middle of an extract coming out of a bottle. And then, of course, Dartmoor in southwest England is such a beautiful place. And stepping stones, for me, actually are a real challenge, literally, physically, because they can be slippy. But stepping stones to a place, that's a key issue in permaculture. Very often people will get in touch and say, help me with designing my garden for medicinal plants. And I have to pull people right back and say, hang on, what do you want to do this for? So those are the main influences. Apart from my parents, wonderful. My father was a librarian, my mother was a nurse. What a brilliant combination. And also inspirational projects, just incredible things. You can just about spot a couple of people here. This is Ohio in the States, where some very far-sighted people, part of the United Plant Savers connections, have brought back to life native trees and shrubs and underplants. It's an area that was coal mined, so it was literally scraped bare, and the various neighbours got together, and the United Plant Savers have a botanical sanctuary there. So projects like that are totally inspirational, and I think we know now from, especially from Morag's work, that there are just thousands of other inspirational projects around the world. Hopefully, we'll be getting to hear more of them as time goes on. So this isn't the only project, but I treated myself when I retired from university to a 6-week stint at the Botanical Sanctuary in Ohio and learned a lot about American trees. The reason being that I wanted to plant my own trees and grow them for practice purposes, for creating tinctures and the like. So, having been to North America and seen those fantastic variety of trees there, this is the other end, if you like, of the story, products end. And you can see here the sorts of things that on the left that you can obtain from an allotment. You can grow a lot on allotment, but we have a funny rule here in the UK. You can't grow trees on most allotments. And so a lot of my herbal medicine that came from the allotment had to be focused on lower ground plants. But nevertheless, you can do an awful lot. And these are the kind of plants you probably find in you probably wouldn't necessarily find in a herb garden, because people tend to think of culinary herbs like sage and thyme and so on. But you can extend. I think we've got, what have we got? We've got mullein, makes great ear oil, globe artichoke, that's really bitter leaf that makes a wonderful tincture for digestion. Marigold, that gives us the resinous, antifungal kind of properties, ideal for making infused oils and balms. And then bush fruits, such as strawberries and raspberries. And of course, there are lots of plants that you don't just have to use the fruits, you can use the leaves too. So raspberry leaf is commonly advised after the 6th month in pregnancy as a toning tea for helping childbirth. And of course, strawberries. I chose the strawberry as my image, my logo, if you like, when I started out in practice as a clinical herbal practitioner. And the strawberry for me represents the most amazing multifunctional plant that I can imagine. It's brilliant for ground cover. It's brilliant for your body because of the fruits and the vitamin C and so on. And it has wonderful leaves that make tea. I think people often forget about the leaves with plants. I'll say more about that when I get to the section on trees. So I was doing pretty well with the allotment, but when we actually set up the woodland, things literally grew like topsy. And in the middle, I've put a few syrups, capsules containing bark powder, dried willow leaves. There's so much here, I can't even actually see what's here. The woodland was so productive that in a way we started to panic and think, well, what can we do with all of this? It's too much. So we created a little body care line called Herbs. And because of the restrictions around making medicinal claims, making body care remedies was a much more straightforward route. And on my Substack, I've written articles about getting into the regulation of body care products and so on. But we had lovely products like Eau de Cologne Splash, which is one that I had already been making for friends as a gift. Witch hazel moisturizer based on the North American witch hazel and the good old marigold balm. I also invented a deodorant spray using witch hazel and rosemary because they both distill really well. They were quite suitable. And just to the final left here is a little box of twigs of myrtle, which make really wonderful toothpicks. So as we went along, I discovered loads and loads of possibilities, and I was trying to use all of the plant. So unused parts could go to compost. I could make biochar with bigger bits and so on. And then on the right, this is the crucial bit, really. It is slippery elm bark. Slippery elm, Ulmus fulva or Ulmus rubra is the scientific name. It's a North American species, and it's dying all over the place, as elm has been dying in the UK. And slippery elm bark is the under layer of the bark. So it can only really be harvested from decent size trees. And during my stay at United Plant Savers, we visited out with Paul Strauss, who's a fantastic source of wisdom about Native American plants. And he found a slippery elm that was dying and harvested it, because there's no point in harvesting anything that looked healthy because you want it to grow on, not to keep the species alive, but it's dying. You might as well use it. So we're now looking at plants that are not necessarily hugely valuable, but are actually suffering in their native habitat. And what can you use as an alternative? And of course, there are some plants that have been harvested practically to extinction, and they might be protected, like the ginseng that we saw in the woods. So meanwhile, demand for herbal products has shot up. It's been going up at, 10 or 15% a year, so that it is a multi-million, billion-dollar business. So I've only got to the second slide. I'm going to try and speed up a little. So let's have a look at some of the plants that we could be using in the UK. They've all got relatives everywhere else in the world, so this probably applies more widely. And these are all plants that we grew or learnt how to manage, actually, at Holt Wood. And on the very left, this is crampbark, or Viburnum opulus. It's not actually a native as such. It's a European tree. It's often called the snowball tree because it produces lovely white bunches of tiny flowers. It's related to the honeysuckle family, and it's fantastic, as the name implies, as an antispasmodic. And this is the one that really got me going, because if you dry the bark and you powder it and put it into capsules, which is done with a hand-filling machine, then you've got an instant period pain remedy. Of course, quite often when I tell people this, they say, oh, I'm too old to use that. So if you younger people, can you spread the word about crampbark, Viburnum opulus, as a fantastic period pain remedy? No more aspirin, paracetamol, whatever. You want 2 or 3 capsules every 2 or 3 hours. And drying the bark, as long as you chop it up first, the hard part is grinding it to a good fine powder. Secondly, we've got hawthorn, which is in the UK. There's so much hawthorn in the UK. Every hedge is tons and tons of hawthorn. But farmers tend to slash the sides of the hawthorn hedges every year. So the hawthorn in hedges doesn't often produce berries because the berries are only produced on 1-year-old wood. So if you do have a hawthorn hedge, and if you're a farmer, I recommend doing one side at a time, and then you'll get the berries on the other side every other year. But hawthorn is actually very well researched. It's shown to be an excellent remedy for the circulation, improving heart action, and it has a bilateral action on blood pressure. So if your blood pressure is too high, it can gently bring it down. If it's too low, it can slightly bring it up. It's so effective that it is not recommended if you're on blood pressure medication. But we can make a nice tincture by bashing up the berries, or hips, haws, as they're called, and putting them in a spirit like vodka or gin for 4 to 6 weeks. Let them soak, then strain off the vodka or gin, and you've got a tincture, probably about the right strength, 25% alcohol, to keep for at least several years. But as I say, if you're on heart or blood pressure medication, not appropriate, because you'll get a combination of effects. If you want to use hawthorn for those sorts of purposes, I'd recommend consulting a practitioner, because then they will take all of your situation into account. I can talk a bit more about the practitioner side if anybody's interested. Thirdly, juniper. This is a wonderful conifer. There's many conifers native in the UK, but it's quite rare now, so planting it is encouraged. It's very popular to make botanical gin to get the berries, but then you do need male and female plants. For my purpose, it makes an excellent infused oil because it has antiseptic, resinous, essential oil content. And then you can use that infused oil to make other things like balms and so on. I've also used it to make insect repellent emollient that you can put on skin. And then last of all, probably the one that's most well known is the willow. This is a pollarded white willow. It's a good idea to pollard willow. In fact, if you plant willow, you're really making a commitment to keep it pollarded, because if you don't, it will grow like a giant and it will put its roots into any pipes nearby. But willow has also been fairly well researched for pain relief, particularly back pain. And it's not quite the same as aspirin, but that's something I talk about in my book, following the Medicinal Forest Garden book, a book called Trees That Heal, which I'll talk about a bit later. I'm just going to go back one. Okay. There's a problem with the UK native trees and shrubs. If you look at the trees, there are actually less than 40 species in the UK that are native, which is not a big range of plants. Obviously, there are lots of shrubs as well. In fact, in terms of natives, there are 60-odd natives in the UK, but the other 20 or so are all service trees, which are all different varieties. So we're really short on variety here in the UK. And defining native is quite difficult. Is it since we broke off from Europe, not politically, but land-wise? Or is it trees that have only been here for a few hundred years? So there's a kind of a debate there. Some trees have been added in the last few hundred years, like the horse chestnut and, of course, lots of ornamental trees. So there's an issue here about localization. If we stuck to local, we would be very limited in terms of herbal medicine. We'd be probably lacking in anything that affects hormones, stimulants, the nervous system, and more. I'm not saying we couldn't survive, but it would be a great shame. So, introduce trees and shrubs. Some of these trees have been introduced as ornamentals. Quite a few were brought in the 1700s or so by explorers looking for trees to exploit. So there is a political aspect to this tale, because exploitation, Britain did exploit a lot of places and probably still hasn't fully recognised all of that activity. So here I would like to say that I really appreciate the trees that have come to this country rightly or wrongly, they're here now. And some examples are ginkgo, which is a very popular street tree in places like London. It will suffer all kinds of pollution and will grow to quite a good size. But commercially, ginkgo is grown pretty much as a coppice for its leaves, and the leaves are harvested for their anti-inflammatory purposes, and it's sold worldwide, used for all sorts of things like blood circulation in the brain, particularly. I'm going to sneeze. Sorry. Excuse me. Okay, second, Iberian ginseng, a wonderful plant. It will grow readily here. The trouble is with ginseng, Siberian ginseng, is that it is recommended for harvesting the roots. But myself and a number of other herbalists have discovered that we can use the bark as well. So that's great. And it's a powerful adaptogen. So it helps the body to withstand stress. This one here is chasteberry. Some people will know the chaste tree. It's very much a Mediterranean plant. I've seen it growing wild on the shores of Turkey. And this can affect hormonal balance in the body. So it's considered to be progesteronal, even though it doesn't actually contain progesterone. Very useful in menopause and lots of other gynecological problems. And the last of all, my favourite, the toothache tree. This is prickly ash. If you chew a leaf, you won't blow your head off, but you can taste the power in this plant. It's a stimulant, essentially. It will stimulate blood flow. And it's used by herbalists, particularly in tincture form, to deal with lots of circulatory problems, such as problems with circulation in the legs and more. So just for examples, really, I hope, show us that bringing in introduced trees from other places, so long as we manage them, is so that they don't become invasive, is a wonderful thing for herbal medicine. So I have a very ambivalent approach to localization. I want people to be using more herbal medicine and in their communities locally. And I'm part of a project growing herbal medicine for a community not far away in Devon. But I don't want people to be exploiting these plants by buying them up left and centre and creating a trade that may be problematic in terms of these plants. So it's a fine balance. And we need more information about the actual sales worldwide. And that is a problem. There's some good records in America, in North America. The US records show shop sales and other sources online for some of these plants, which is very helpful. Interestingly, the most popular plant in recent times was the elderberry, something that we can grow very easily here. Okay. Oh, can't avoid advertising myself. Morag mentioned the Medicinal Forest Garden Handbook, and really that contains 7 chapters all about creating a design, getting your purpose based on our experience of establishing Holtwood. And there are 40 tree profiles in the book with information all about establishing them and cultivating them and so on. But I had so much material for that book that Trees and Shrubs That Heal contains the original 40 plus another 40, so 80 altogether. And I added in, because I want people to be using these species confidently, I added in a recipe for every tree so that hopefully people will, a simple, when I say simple recipe, a recipe that be fairly straightforward to do. But I also put in some chapters about how the chemicals in these plants work so that people feel more confident about what they might be using them for. A little bit more about Holtwood, and then I'll be nearly done. So for me, I'm an educator. I started off teaching maths and science and then psychology, and I ended up managing education classes, evening classes for adults and so on. That's always been, I suppose, if you like, the underlying ethos in my practice, apart from treating patients in Devon. I've retired now from practice. And so it wasn't long before we started running courses at Holtwood. And here you can see all sorts of things about Holtwood, about the establishment, which might be of interest. We had to have a deer fence because you can't really grow trees. We have a plague of deer in this country. And we also had to create, this was a gully along here, So we had to create water management strategies, and we had to create storage. So this is a garage side shed, which is quite hard to get planning permission for. But in forestry projects here, it's possible to get agreement to putting up a tool store. And we had to get facilities that would enable us to invite people in. So space for parking and so on, and facilities for catering. And here we have teaching space. You can see my flip chart at the back. I'm a very traditional teacher. But we ended up running 3 different kinds of courses, really. There were general invitations. This one on the left here is all about making stuff. And if you haven't got one already, these are brilliant little grinders. It's actually a grain grinder. It's the kind of thing that is made in places like India. So it's hand grinding, and you can't grind to a very fine powder, but you can grind a lot of things into smaller particles, which makes them much more useful. This is dry thing. Don't think it works with wet or fresh stuff. And so getting hold of things like coffee grinders to make powder, a grain grinder to make particles, which would be ideal for making tinctures and so on, it is a good idea. We also talked about establishing medicinal forest garden and what to do with your unwanted bits of branch and so on. And here I'm making biochar in a wheelbarrow, which is a really interesting process. You get a big pile of wood chip, not wood chip, but wood twigs and branches chopped up. And as soon as it catches light in the wheelbarrow, then you put another layer in. And as soon as that catches light, then you put another layer in until you've used up all your pieces. And then you pour a bucket of water on it to stop the burn. And that's creating a form of biochar, which has thousands and thousands of layers in it. So it can be very bioactive and be inoculated and drenched with kind of liquid manure to provide a great feed for trees. And then down here is a session talking about plant identification. And this was when we discovered that people really enjoy making teas from woodland leaves. And we would collect together 2 or 3 varieties and infuse them in hot water. And people would say, oh, this tastes quite good. So things like rose family plants, which are very astringent and tea-like in their taste, added to more flavoursome or more health-promoting teas. We were getting older. In 2020, the pandemic struck, and I had to refund so many people for the courses that we decided to stop actively promoting the wood to sell it, and we sold it privately so it can't be visited, and to go online. And that's when I set up my online courses and the Medicinal Forest Garden Trust for real. As I was saying to Morag earlier, I had a bit more time, less streaming, more online activity. So finally, if you're interested in some of the things I've been doing, then you're very welcome to visit the Medicinal Forest Garden Trust. I hope this code worked. I only just put it on here, and it should take you to medicinalforestgardentrust.org, which is the website. And just to finish off, this is my current involvement with the band of volunteers. This is a millennium project established by a village, Sanford. So it was established in 2000, and I was involved in the original design with other herbalists and gardeners. And we have created a wonderful, useful formal planting with circular beds, and behind a forest garden where I'm gradually increasing the range of medicinal plants. So it's a lovely place. And my current interest is in thinking about several things. One is I'm very interested in resources of seed, how we can set up seed-saving networks around medicinal plants. Perhaps there are some that I'm not aware of. I'm interested in promoting community around herbal medicine, because there are lots of interesting issues. I'm going to be talking at the Agroforestry Symposium online in November, which is Martin Crawford's organisation, Agroforestry Research Trust. I'll be talking about the community side of medicinal forest gardening there. And if you're interested to read my kind of ongoing blogs, I put myself onto Substack a few years back, and I'm gradually building up a following there, and people can subscribe for free or not. I think Morag has the links that will go in the show notes, but I'll put that one in the chat. And I think that's everything I want to say for the moment.
Thank you, Anne.
I'll stop.
Thank you so much. And my gosh, there's so many questions that I have for you, and there's so many questions that are starting to come in on the chat. I just want to say to everyone who's here, please do feel free to start dropping in questions in the chat, or use this little hand up feature and I'll be able to see you to bring you in to ask questions directly. But there's a lot of little specific questions and then bigger questions I want to ask, but let me just go through my list here. So you were talking about, there was the plant for talking about period pain, and that you can put it in little capsules. And at the time you said you got to grind it to a powder, which can be hard. Is that just using the coffee grinder? Is that fine enough to get it to something that can be absorbed in our body?
Yes, basically. Now, another way you could do it would be to put the bark. What I do is I coppice cramp bark so that then I get youngish bark. It comes off really well about just before it produces leaves. And so I harvest the long stems. They're usually about 3 or 4 foot long. And I sit watching the television, scraping the bark off. And that can go straight into a spirit. Gin and vodka, about 40% are ideal, or some people can get hold of a plain spirit. And so it can be extracted that way after 4 to 6 weeks. And then you can take a teaspoon or 2 every couple of hours. But if you can grind it fine enough into powder, then capsules tastes pretty disgusting. So it's not a tea really. And what I do powder rosemary for medicinal, and hard to find powdered rosemary. It's brilliant. You sprinkle it over everything. And if you put the dried leaves in a coffee grinder and whiz them, and then sieve that through a small tea sieve, and then whiz what's left over and keep doing that, it's pretty hard work. You can reach a fine powder. We had a commercial grinder, which we bought. It was actually Chinese, and it was bought through an American source. And that was a hammer grinder. I put more about that in the handbook, the Medicinal Forest Garden Handbook. But that would be necessary for larger quantities.
Yeah, amazing. Because
the problem is from the capsules. Sorry, if it's not fine enough powder, it's a devil to get into the capsule.
Yeah, quite small, those things, aren't they?
Yeah.
But I was thinking about a lot of what you're talking about it's something that you could do. You could do at home at your home scale level, but there's also something that you were alluding to as this being a potentially huge industry. If you're thinking about sustainable regenerative farming systems, that you can create like a sustainable agriculture system that's based on just gently collecting herbal medicines from a forest, and the forest stays, and it just is a gentle farming system. And I think, is anyone doing that in the UK, do you know, or is it all mostly just community-based activities?
There are some herbalists, wonderful herbalists, who are doing local community apothecaries. And I think this is why one of the reasons I'm interested is what guidelines, what practice, because there are ethical issues. We should be really cautious about actually treating people unless we know what we're doing. And we need to be able to distinguish what might be a minor ailment. As I was saying before, there are lots of issues with people who have more chronic ailments or prescriptions and so on that we need to be careful about. And if you fell over and broke a leg, I wouldn't run out and buy and find a comfrey plant to heal your nip bone. I would call it an ambulance. It's so, but I think if you like, where that needs to focus is on education, because the more people know, the more likely they are to go to the whole food shop and say, I'm looking for dried rosemary. Have you got it that I can use powdered or whatever? Or the more people will know what plant to plant in their garden and processes for managing that and harvesting and using it successfully. So I see education as key, really, if there is a community project of any kind. It's not like a chemist where you go in and say, give me something for, I don't know, head lice. in which case we'd be looking at Australian plants, tea tree, the wonderful tea tree essential oil. We need education about staying healthy, how to stop reinfestation, as well as what remedies to use. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And there was something, I think there were some questions in the chat too around like, how do you even begin to learn what you're sharing about? There's university courses in the UK. Are they available to be accessed online, or for a home-based activity, are the courses that you host and the networks that you are hosting through your community, is that where people would start? If someone's interested in diving into this more deeply, what do you suggest?
A good place to start in the UK, and I think there are some links abroad, is the National Institute of Medical Herbalists. They have a website, nimh.org.uk. So they have an online register of herbalists in this country, but they also used to have, I hope it's still there, a page listing lots of courses. And the course that I started on was a 1-year kind of home apothecary course, which then I discovered that there was something which was also distance learning and involved a few weekends for the practical skills, because we did a lot of clinical skills. And since degrees have become harder to fund, especially self-fund, there are a number of organisations in the UK that are running online provision, and they will be listed in the professional practitioner listing.
Thank you. So also, I guess if anyone is interested in trying to find out more about this, they can follow up and talk to you at the email.
For sure.
Yeah.
I might send you a standard answer if it's a fairly standard question. So
Sure.
excuse me if it's just for time-saving purposes.
Yes. So I was wanting to just look through the questions here. So I've just landed on a couple. Firstly, I can see Doris. Hello, Doris. Are there guidelines around harvesting at a certain time of the day?
So there's quite a lot of guidelines about harvesting generally, like knowing what you're harvesting, etc., etc. But the time of the day for me hasn't been a particularly big issue compared to the other guidelines. So I would say, so long as plants aren't wet, if you harvest nettles, even if they're not wet and put them in a bag, they will start to rot almost immediately. So it's planning the harvest is the most important thing. Getting a means to get your plants home without too much damage and making sure they are the right plants. And the right time is very often an issue for people. This can be very confusing. Should you harvest before flowering, etc., etc.? So it does vary a lot with individual plants. So
finding
in
that
terms of time of the
information,
day, I don't have an issue.
So finding that information, is that in your book or is that in the courses, or how would people find out that kind of detail?
So some of it will be on the Substack and some of it will be in the book about identifying and harvesting plants.
Yeah, great. Excellent. Wonderful. And also too, I guess, just for call out too, for that agroforestry symposium would also be a great place to find out more information and connect in with that broader community too. So I'll find the link and share that out with a follow-up email too. There's a question here from Natalie saying, I've got alpine strawberries in my garden. Are they useful herbally? Do you know those ones?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things I didn't mention is related species. With strawberries, they are all part of the rose family. They've all contain astringents. If you're interested in the chemistry, then Trees and Shrubs That Heal is the later book is good because it explains this reasoning, if you like, and tree families. The leaves will still be useful, yes. If you're interested in making things, the first book, the 2020 Medicinal Forest Garden Handbook, has a chapter with a sample recipe about different techniques. The second book has a recipe for every tree or shrub profile. So it just depends which way you want to go.
That answers Grace's question. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. I'm just scrolling up. I've
noticed one about traditional practices.
Oh, great.
And just wanted to say that here's another contradiction. I first realized this when I was training as a herbalist and I wanted to use valerian. And I looked up valerian in the sort of folklore and it doesn't exist. It was not used as a folklore remedy. But we know that valerian is a fantastic remedy for sleep and anxiety and so on. So I thought, well, how do I manage this? And I've really beginning to think that tradition is a pointer, but it doesn't give us the answers. There's lots more experimentation, like finding that Siberian ginseng, we can use the bark instead of the root. That's much more sustainable. We can keep the shrub or tree alive. And that way, if we stick to tradition only and don't open ourselves to what we can know from science or experiment, then I think we're limiting ourselves rather.
So it's an alive body of knowledge that's continuing, is what you're saying, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the ginseng too, because I've often struggled with that when I see in my garden things they're saying, oh, I should do the root. And I've tried other things. And I'm just wondering with the ginseng, it also has a fruit. Is the fruit also as useful as the bark or the leaf?
Yes.
Or is it just the bark?
So I can't really say about the fruit. The reason being that I have got one in my cottage garden, but it doesn't produce very much seed. And I'm more interested in producing more plants. So now that I know I can use the bark from a branch from pruning, I can't really answer that question. I don't know what research has been done. What's interesting about ginseng, it's quite closely related to ivy. And if you look at the flowers and the seeds, they're very similar looking. And ivy seeds are quite toxic, really. It's the leaves that are used. So I would be cautious about the seeds.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you for that. I see there's a question from Afshan. Before we go to you, Afshan, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned about pollarding, and I just wanted to ask you a bit more about that, the practice of pollarding and coppicing, and you talked also about hedging one side and the other. So this practice of managing the food forest in a way that's going to help it to continue to thrive with abundance. What are those practices that you
put your finger on another contradiction,
right, okay.
which is if you don't harvest a herb garden, it soon becomes really horribly scraggly. And that's true even for the traditional herb garden. And it's especially true for the medicinal forest garden. So coppicing and pollarding are ideal practices. And also it means you can have larger trees in smaller spaces. Coppicing cutting to the ground or within 6 inches or so. And I've been trying to find out which trees coppice better. Pollarding is usually cutting to maybe head height or a bit lower, or in London we have street trees that are coppiced very high, pollarded, bigger one, high up. The thing about them is that they have to be done on an ongoing basis. And so once you start, if you stop, then you create sometimes a bush or a shrub with rather weak limbs. So it would be wonderful if we had an index of coppicability, because then you get fresh bark. You're not using old and gnarly bark, which is not much good. And we would use probably more bark that way.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I don't think many people think about bark particularly often unless you're into herbalism. Really, is it? Because like bark is just bark. People are looking for the fruit or the leaves.
I know.
But the bark, one of the key things that you've talked a lot about throughout all of the different examples. And I think and also edible leaves of trees. Or that too, I think
stick to tradition. Why?
Revolutionary when you think about it. I look out here in my garden, I'm looking at mulberries and I'm looking at all these different plants, all these edible leaves, and you think, wow, there's so much food out there.
I agree, totally.
What are some of the edible leaves that you would find in your context?
A lot of the rose family. So that's most of the fruiting trees. All of those leaves can be used for infusing in teas. Brilliant. And because of their astringency, their tannins, they will taste tea-like. All of the mint family, we already use the leaves quite naturally because they're very aromatic. But there are lots of other aromatic trees that can be used. Eucalyptus, perfect example. Although eucalyptus leaves are quite tough. You have to bash them a bit. But there are trees like sweet gum, there's a North American version, which are wonderfully aromatic, very antiseptic, and they make ideal steam. So you can use them fresh or dried, put them into boiling water, be careful with the steam, towel over your head, very good for the sinuses.
Yeah.
Could go on, but we won't have.
I grew up, my mum was very interested in natural medicine and herbs, and she didn't train in anything, but yeah, that was something that we did, and we got a snuffly nose. All right, up, in you go. Or what was something else? we used to have witch hazel shampoo. I remember that. Witch hazel infused
Yeah.
shampoo.
Which is lovely.
And I think as a teenager or even pre-teenager, I used to get lots of warts on my fingers. So she got this special thuja cream for me.
Yep.
Does that actually work, or was that a
Booyah, yes, tree of life.
Yeah.
It does have some antiviral effect. But you can also use the stems of poppy family relatives. There's a yellow sort of latex. In fact, you can use quite a lot of things. The inside of banana skins is
Really?
quite proteolytic. Because what you're doing is you're taking off the top layer of skin so that healthy skin can grow underneath.
Ah, that's interesting. I think my
I just
dad used to
remembered-
use the inside of thistle. Would that do it?
Now that would be interesting. I haven't.
Yeah, he
come
swore
across
by
that one.
that. He didn't swear, but he said that he used that as a teenager himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
I've just remembered something I forgot to mention, which is last year I created a taster course for the courses I run online. And I'll put the link in the chat.
Oh,
it's called
please do.
Discover Medicinal Forest Gardening, and it gives a starting point in those 3 short courses online. So
Wonderful.
I'll put that in.
I just noticed that I haven't gone back to you, Afshan. I'm just looking for your question. There's a lot of chat that's come since then. Afshan was talking about. How about you unmute yourself and ask it, Afshan, because I can't find your question. Are you there?
Hey, Morag.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. And I think my question was, I work in Malawi in sub-Saharan Africa, and we have a large permaculture garden at a hospital. And I'm just always wondering about the balance between the herbal approach and the clinical side. I often get a lot of questions about it. I'm obviously not a professional herbalist, but I just wonder how you address some of those challenges between clinical and herbal medicinal approaches.
I agree. There is another contradiction. I've met retired pharmacists who did learn about plants in their training, Materia Medica. But now, of course, Materia Medica is not really covered. Neither often is diet, which is mad. But so it's very difficult with medical practitioners. And they're very aware of possible legal issues. So they will often take the safer path, which, of course, we have to be safe. So one of the things I'm always very clear on when I'm writing is to always give a caution, take advice. In fact, it's good to get to know a local trained medical herbalist. Check that a medical herbalist is properly qualified. If you're a healthcare person, you're in a really great position because you can gently suggest alternative possibilities for self-care and so on, because you'll be aware of dangers, red flags that you might say, I think this needs to go to a medically qualified person. In some places, like in the States, it's actually illegal to diagnose. So you do have to be careful. And I think this is a very interesting issue. And the answer is education, because if you educate people, then they will go out and explore more confidently, ask for the right things, buy the right things, use them correctly. So it has to be education first is the answer. So maybe by offering educational events of some kind, skin and body care is a great place to start because there's less internal potential for problems. And also teas, herbal teas. I always start with talking about herbal teas because the dosage is really low.
Yeah.
But you still see improvements.
Yeah, we tend to focus on the like lemongrass, mint, rosella, artemisia, rosemary, lavender, things that we know have been well understood and researched within the space. The challenge we have is we have a local Pitocin that is a lot of the local herbalists mix with the root of a okra plant, a local okra, and aloe vera, and they consume it, and it helps accelerate the release of oxytocin. And we get a lot of women who then have postpartum hemorrhaging.
Oh, God.
So we have to talk about it a lot because they'll get to 40 weeks and they're really anxious to deliver. So it's something that we've said if we understood the microscopy of it, that it could be bottled and probably marketed, but it's very dangerous.
It sounds, again, education. Going to a disco or having a party is possibly a good way to help things along. I'm sure there are other suggestions that people would share of help.
I need to wrap us up here, but I just wanted to say thank you to Afshan too for jumping in there, because also
Yeah.
Afshan will be coming in about a month's time now to share about her project, the Permaculture Garden at the hospital in Malawi, which if you came to the festival, you saw a little snip of. So I hope that you'll come back for that. But I just want to thank you so much, Anne, for coming and sharing today, and so many rich resources that people can continue to go off and explore from your books and your courses and your website, and heading off to the agroforestry symposium. Is that something that people can connect with online, I'm hoping?
Yep.
All sorts of things we can dip our toes in. Yeah, really just, thank you so very much, Anne.
Thank you, Morag. You're doing such a good job there. I really enjoyed myself.
Yeah, great. That's the best thing. All right. Take care. Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you, everyone,
Bye
for
all.
being here. Bye.